Once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over and our story-oriented segment when we talk to some of the best authors anywhere. He's the best-selling author of over 36 novels for children and young readers, including the Newberry Award-winning Maniac Magee. He's here tonight to discuss the source of some of his best-loved stories, offer tips to getting your kids to read, and his latest book, The Warden's Daughter. Here's my interview with Jerry Spinelli. Jerry, you initially wrote for adults. You didn't intend to write for kids. Tell us how this happened.
I had written 4 books that nobody wanted over a period of about 15 years.
Wow.
Started in on book number 5, thanks to one of my kids who stole my lunch one day out of the refrigerator, and I started writing something about that at work that day. To the extent that a non-published author can be audacious enough to imagine an audience, I imagined an audience of somebody like people like you and me reading it, because I thought, thinking back on the life of a 13-year-old kid, I thought it was funny and interesting, and I thought folks like us would find it interesting to go back and look at that. But when my agent went to sell it to publishers, they told her, well, this is about a kid. Adults won't read a kid's book. You're going to have to peddle this to the juvenile divisions, which is what she did, and that's where I landed, and I've been there ever since.
Wow. Where did that character come from? I remember Jason. I read that book. It was Space Station 7th grade.
That's right. Yes.
Why is that your favorite book?
I'd say it's my co-favorite.
Okay.
I guess because it's my first published. Yeah. And when you consider that it came along 25 years, a quarter of a century after I decided I wanted to be a writer, that was pretty meaningful. So my first baby, my co-favorite, yes.
Yeah. What's your favorite?
Well, I'd say along with that, I'd name Maniac Magee.
Yeah, and we'll talk about him in a moment, because that's such a favorite, I know, to everyone watching, and certainly to this guy. Many of your books, so many of them, right down to your most recent, The Warden's Daughter, they really do touch on lived experience and really universal memories. How much of it do you rely on your own memories or those of your children?
I would say a lot, particularly myself.
Really?
That's what I do. People assume, considering the number of kids and grandkids that we have, 6 kids, 30 grandkids, that I must be using them for source material all the time.
Right.
But in fact, more often than not, it's myself. I remember things. I remember giving my first public talk, and somebody in the audience raised a hand and said, "How do you remember all this stuff?" And that was my first indication that apparently not everyone does. I thought it was common.
Right.
I thought we all carry this stuff around like an addict. But I don't always remember what I did or said, but I often remember my reactions to things. I remember how I felt about things. Yeah. And so I'm constantly mining my own memories.
Wow. I am amazed, I have to tell you. That was the thing. In fact, I made a note about it. How do you recall this? You know, when I read that you mine your own memories for so many of these characters, some of their reaction and the situations they find themselves in, I was thinking, I can't remember those. It is a rare gift.
Maybe it is, and for that I'm thankful. It's given me a career. I remember getting a letter from a kid in the 90s. He said, Jason is just like me.
Yeah.
How do you know what I think? And I wanted to tell the kid, and here it goes back to the question, kids don't change. Their haircuts change, their sneakers cost more, and so forth. Yeah. But a kid when I was growing up in the 50s and a kid today they still have the same feelings, the same situations. A kid is a kid. There's the eternal kid. That doesn't change. And so if I'm going back and mining myself at the same time, I'm mining us all, the eternal kid.
Right. Do you feel any obligation, because as I read your body of work, there are lessons of kindness, acceptance, perseverance, And I see a redemptive finish in so many of these books. Is that intentional? Do you feel an obligation to give children a sense of redemption for these characters and for those readers?
Absolutely. Let me say a couple things in that regard. First of all, my first priority is to tell a good story. Otherwise, I think I might wind up, if I'm too focused on the message and the moral, I'm going to wind up with a pamphlet.
Right.
Not a novel.
Not a story. Right.
I want it to be a story. I want a kid to put it down and say, that was a good story. Okay. But then along with the story and the characters, they drive me toward, steer me toward a message. And in the most general terms, that message is yes. I got a master's degree at Johns Hopkins at the writing seminars, and our chairman said there are two kinds of literature, yes and no. And I've always liked that distinction. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
So I decided right then and there, years before I would ever have a book published, that I was going to write yes stories. And to this day, I keep that in mind.
Does belief play any role in your stories? Your personal belief?
I'm sure it does. I'm not always tapping into it consciously. And here, what's resonating with me now is something that Madeleine L'Engle said. The story often knows more than the writer. And so, you know, it seems like the less I think, the faster I write, the better I get. And so I like to think that things are flowing through me all the time, that I'm not necessarily calculating.
Dean Koontz, whom I interviewed recently, he has that same approach. Dean says
that right?
He feels, you know, there's another hand guiding this.
Sure.
He's not always in control and doesn't want to be.
Yes, exactly. That's the art of it. That's why it's an art, not a science. I've read a couple of his books,
In 1989, you make a pretty major decision in your life to write full-time. You quit your day job and you do this. There was a lot of hardship for a while there financially. How hard was that for your family? You had 6 children.
Yeah, it was scary. By that time, we were down to 2 in the house. There were 4 of us, and I won't give you the figures, but I already had the first couple of books published, so a little bit was coming in, but emphasis on the word little. And it wasn't easy, and I was out of work only for about a year, and I was beginning to look at the one ads because I didn't think we were going to be able to make it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what made you stick to it? I mean, you were already, I imagine, writing about this character, Jeffrey Lionel McGee, who would become Maniac McGee.
Yes. I had. Yeah, that was fairly recent, and that book had come out, was not setting the world on fire. But then you say, what happened?
Yeah, tell us what happened.
A phone call happened at midnight, out in the hallway, and my wife and I are asleep. I hear the phone ringing in the hallway. I don't want to answer it. When's the last time you got good news at midnight over the phone? It doesn't happen.
Never.
It's always, at midnight, it's bad news. Who died?
Right, exactly.
But you know, I had a. So I answered it, and there was somebody on the end of the line telling me that they were careful not to get the facts mixed up with the truth, which I recognized as a line from the beginning of Maniac McGee.
Right.
And it turns out that some folks in a hotel room in Chicago had cast a vote, and Maniac McGee was the winner. And so, first thing I knew was that I didn't need to go back to work, at least not the other previous job. My work now
was writing.
Once and forever was going to be writing.
And you were a Newbery Honor winner.
Yeah, well, Newbery Medal winner is what they called it. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Tell me about that story, because it's a beautiful sort of fable about that engages racism, and the story of this boy alone finding his way, being adopted, if you will, temporarily by various families. Where did this story find its germ?
It's hard to say. I wrote 80 pages of it, tossed them away, wrote 100 more, tossed them away, and really wasn't I couldn't zero in on it. I think I wanted to write about a kid who was a hero to other kids. And more than anything else, first, there was the memory of a song. Now, you're way too young to remember this. Late 50s, early 60s, Martha and the Vandellas, Dancing in the Street.
Right.
Well-known
Sure.
a song. That always affected me. The vision of that song suggests everyone,
Dancing in
all
the
kinds,
street.
all colors, all backgrounds, dancing together in the street. And I think I wanted to write a book that would deliver a vision like that. So I think that more than anything, and then deciding after those two strikes that to make Maniac, to focus it in on the black-white issue more than anything else. And once I began to focus in on it, I was visited by the Muse. I wasn't sure I believed in the Muse, speaking of belief.
Yeah.
Didn't know I believed in the Muse until it visited me. One night, I'm there not even thinking about it because I had had the two flame outs, and I figured, well, okay, I'm going to turn my back on this book for a couple of days. And sometimes, as you know, that's when things happen.
Yeah, it starts crackling. You hear it in the bathtub. You hear it when you're walking the dog.
Yeah. And what I heard in my ear one night was they say Maniac McGee was born in a dump. I wasn't reaching for that sentence. I wasn't thinking about the book at all. Those words just popped from nowhere into my head. And I went on and wrote a couple of paragraphs, showed them to Eileen, and she said, that's it. And the book was on its way.
Amazing. You mentioned Eileen, your wife Eileen.
Yes.
Who, if the reports can be believed, was the inspiration for Stargirl, another one of your great books.
Yes.
Almost a messianic figure in some ways. As
I like
read
to
it.
think so. Thank you for using that word. I don't remember anyone using it before, but yes, in more ways than one.
Because she's beloved. She's a girl who's beloved at the beginning, and then rejected and cast aside by all those who supported her previously.
Yeah. There's more than a little resemblance to the New Testament in that book, which, as far as I know, so far after 17 years, only one writer, one fan letter writer,
really
has
caught
noticed.
It. Well, now there's two of us. There's two of us. Why did you want to write that? Because that also has a mythic quality to it that. It makes it seem, in my reading, more timeless, larger, more eternal in some way. Was that intentional?
Sure. I was almost saying something that humans, people, as a race and as exemplified by this particular character, are hopefully moving in a better direction. That she represents the best in us.
Yeah.
And what we can be. That's how I look at it. And so I'm just kind of making my pitch there, and we'll see what happens.
And giving it to amazing young people who are so hungry, I think, for role models, for a way to figure this life we're in out. Now, Maniac McGee is set in a town called Two Mills.
Yes.
In some of the writing and reportage I've seen, this town is sort of based on your childhood, Norristown, where you grew up.
Yes.
Two Mills was the setting for Maniac McGee. It is also the setting of your newest book, The Warden's Daughter. Why did you return to Two Mills, and why did you call it Two Mills?
Because it's where I grow up, and as you know, what piece of advice to young aspiring writers is more common than write what you know?
Right.
So it just feels natural and comfortable for me to return to that setting. Don't ask me why I changed the name from Norristown to Two Mills, but didn't change the names of some of the other streets in the town. That's hard. That's a hard one to answer. It's just a fly by the seat of your pants kind of thing that an artist does. That's all.
That's right.
But it just felt right that that's where the events ought to take place. I wanted to put them in a place that was familiar to me, and then I could go ahead and make a legend out of that. And I kind of saw Maniac Magee in particular as a kind of almost Homeric, whereby, you know how when we look back on our kidhoods, we all have this experience. You go back to a house, a place in your kidhood from 30, 40, 50 years ago,
right.
and gee, it's puny. It's not as big and special
right.
and extravagant as you thought.
Right.
You know, and so to that extent, it's hard, it seems to me, to draw a distinction between the legends of our own personal histories and a literary legend like Homer.
Right.
They're kind of, it's the same dynamic at work there.
They're similar,
and I
yeah.
just tapped into that. And that's where I got some of the language for the book.
Right. Now, Cammie O'Reilly, who's your protagonist in The Warden's Daughter, she is the Warden's daughter.
Yes.
Where did she come from? She actually is, her inspiration came from a real person you met in Norristown.
Yes, yes. In fact, it was a Maniac Magee connection. I was on hand at Elmwood Park, where Maniac Magee partly takes place.
Right.
Some students were there. I was talking to them. A woman comes up to me and says, I grew up in Norristown. In fact, I grew up in prison. And she turned out to be who's become a friend of mine for the last 15 years or so. Ellen Adams is her name. She lives in New Jersey. And she explained, she said that because her father was the warden of the Montgomery County Prison, and their family living quarters were right there in the prison.
In the walls.
In the walls, and on the second floor above the entrance, and that prison is still there. It looks like a misplacement from the Middle Ages. It looks like a Norman fortress or something.
Wow.
You're driving down Erie Street in Norristown,
and there it is.
And you can't. You do a double take. You can't believe it's there. It's long since been abandoned. But boy, if that line of hers, I grew up in prison. Girl grows up in prison. That and the sight of these
that was
prison
the first inspiration.
doesn't prompt make you run home and sit down at the keyboard and start writing a story. Then you're not a writer.
Do you outline when you work?
No, I'm sloppier than that, less organized.
So you just start in from, I was born in a prison. In this case, the first line being, you'll know this, I'll bet, and I have to look it up. It's a birdhouse
now. Yes, because with the prison abandoned, there have been efforts to reboot it. Nothing has come to fruition yet. Maybe this will spark something. But yeah, that's how it began.
You just roar through.
No, not at all. I didn't mean that literally. That I sat down and began writing what you have there. What I did do is sit down and start making notes, not outlines or things like that or that organized. But just what the kids would call brainstorming. That's all. And I'm just anything that comes to my mind about a character, a plot situation,
setting,
whatever,
anything.
a setting, anything. I'm just filling up page after page with notes. That's all. And sooner or later, you reach a point where you just don't feel like making notes anymore. It's time. It reaches a kind of critical mass sort of thing. Maybe something nuclear goes on here, and you just got to change phases and start the thing.
And that's how you launch into every project? Is that your basic process?
Basically, yeah.
And how many drafts do you normally do?
I don't do that either.
Really?
Sorry. And I told...
I'm with you. I hate drafts.
Thank you.
One and I'm done.
Thank you. Well, see, I get in trouble sometimes. Like I was speaking at a school today, and when I speak to schools, and I often get that question, and I say I don't do drafts, You know, I feel a
teacher.
little guilty. You know, I get these scowls from teachers, you know, because they're telling their kids to do.
Right.
I'm not saying don't revise.
No.
That's a different story.
Right.
Of course I
We
revise.
all revise, yeah.
I just don't write a draft and then put it
Pitch it and
aside
start
and
over.
start at page one again and start at page one again.
Yeah.
I don't do it that way. I revise in a different way, featuring, for one thing, each day I begin by reading aloud what I wrote the day before. And as you know, you can hear things that you don't necessarily see on a page.
You bet.
So I would recommend to those draft writing kids that they read their own stuff
Aloud.
to themselves aloud,
Yeah.
and hear what they've written, and that's going to help guide them.
That's right.
To revisions.
No, you can hear all the bad notes when you speak it aloud.
Absolutely.
I often catch things when I'm doing the audio book. I consider that my final edit when I'm recording the audio book.
Yes.
Because you'll catch things. Oh, this is not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's the same process.
Yes,
I know.
sure.
Let's talk. There's some story-oriented questions I ask every author that comes here. Your favorite children's book and why?
That would be When You Are Happy. You may not be familiar with it.
No.
I'll tell you who wrote it. The person I live with, Eileen Spinelli. And I consider it the world's most beautiful book. It hits my trifecta for text, illustration, and message. I challenge anybody to show me another book where so much humanity is packed into so few pages. It's a 32-page picture book, and it's beautiful, and I believe it should be in everyone's home in this country. And so that wins my vote, hands down.
What's your least favorite book?
I'm trying to think. I'm not coming up with it.
You're not coming. You see, the writers always have problems with the least favorite.
Yeah.
For me, it's the big monster pieces.
Give me time enough,
Yeah.
and I'd come up with
See,
it.
I'm not a James Joyce
Yeah.
fan. I don't like James Joyce. I cannot read Joyce anymore. I just
Yeah.
I find that torturous.
Yeah, I took a shot. Maybe that's my least favorite book, Finnegan's Wake.
I'm with you.
You're talking to somebody who actually read 30 pages of it.
Oh, well, you see,
And
you
if
got through
anyone
more than
knows
me.
Finnegan's Wake,
Yes.
I dare you to get through a paragraph.
Right.
So I'm proud of those 30
You
pages.
see, but we
Yeah.
agree. I'm glad we agree on
Yeah,
the least
yeah.
favorite. What is the story that helped you find your way and the lesson you derived from it?
Believe it or not, I think it was the first story that meant something to me, and that was my mother reading it to me, and that was Babar the Elephant.
Oh.
And of course, I didn't understand what it meant to me or how it may have affected me till many years later. It's the story that has a sad ending,
Yeah.
of an elephant dying. His mother turns green, I think, in the illustration.
that's right.
From eating a bad mushroom or something?
Yeah.
Am I right?
She gets ill and dies.
Yeah. But I kept asking my mother to keep reading it to me night after night. And then now I ask myself, why did I do that?
Why that?
I'm as sad as it was, and it made me cry every time. I must have been getting something out of it. And I finally figured it. What I was getting out of it was it was making me feel somehow. It was drawing a reaction out of me. It was touching my heart. And what I learned from it was the power of a story. And that leads me to another quote. Muriel Rukeyser, "The universe is not made of atoms, but of stories."
Yeah.
And so I think, I
love that
That's
line.
my answer.
I love that line. It's
Yeah.
a great answer.
Isn't it, though?
Where do you write and why?
I have written in many places. I even wrote once on watch duty when I was with the Naval Air Reserves at Willow Grove Naval Air Station. I have written, as one writer says, in the cracks. When you have a family like I did, a job, several part-time jobs, you learn to write in the cracks of time.
Right.
Now I'm happy to say that things have gone well enough that now my office, my desk is here, and I'm looking out big picture window, and then a few yards of land and a lake. I mean, I see deer walk by, groundhogs, an eagle.
Life moving.
Yeah. In fact, it's almost too good. I seriously considered facing my desk the other way.
So you're not distracted.
Exactly. Because I think that I work best when there isn't a very inspirational setting.
What advice would you give to parents who have children who are reluctant readers? What can they do?
You can put in front of them a book that they can relate to. Take Silas Marner away and give them, go to the library, talk to the children's librarian, let them recommend something that your kid can relate to, a life of a character that in some way resembles your kid's life, and turn them loose.
Yeah, let their own interests drive them to the book, or attract them to the book.
Yeah.
If you could write anything else, what would it be?
Do you mean anything else but
any
fiction?
other topic, but fiction or children's fiction? What else would you write if you could?
Science fiction. The closest I came was Hokey Pokey, which is actually not science fiction, but yeah, I'm a science fiction fan, and often frustrated because I find too little of it that makes me happy. And someday I'd like to write a good one. Yeah.
Final question. George Martin, who wrote The Game of Thrones, has a saying. He claims that all writers are either gardeners or architects. Which are you?
Without having time to think all that through, I suppose yeah, gardener. Nourishing.
Planting seeds and watching them grow.
Seeds, and I think of seeds and plants growing with ourselves. It's earthlings that I'm about, not necessarily Swiss or Africans or Americans or whatever, but all of us together, growing together in the same plot called Earth.
Final question on this book. What do you hope people take from it, and why did you write it?
Beyond the fact that Ellen Adams gave me the spine of a good story,
I'll say.
What I found there was an opportunity to tell the story of someone who is a quiet hero. That's what drives me as much as anything, story after story. They're all around us. We see them all the time. We interact with folks doing wonderful things that nobody knows about. They're getting no trophies. Right. They're getting no headlines. Nobody knows about it, but they're sacrificing themselves in little ways, and often as not, they're doing so on our behalf, and we don't even know it. And such a situation occurs with Cammie and her inmate housekeeper, Eloda Pupko.
No, it's a beautiful story. And thank you for sacrificing for all these years for so many. What an impact you've had. Thank you. What a pleasure.